I was desperate to get away. Life had become a relentless cycle of deadlines, arguments, and insomnia. The idea of disappearing for a week to a secluded Airbnb was intoxicating. I booked a cabin in the woods, far removed from the world. The photos were perfect. A quaint little house surrounded by dense forest with a creek running nearby. The host, a middle-aged couple named Donna and Glenn, had glowing reviews. Everyone raved about how welcoming they were. When I arrived, everything seemed perfect. The cabin was even cozier than the pictures. A fire roared in the fireplace, and the smell of baked bread wafted through the air. Donna greeted me with a warm smile while Glenn unloaded my luggage. "You're going to love it here," Donna said, her voice syrupy sweet. "No distractions, just peace and quiet." That's exactly what I wanted. After showing me around, they handed me an old-fashioned brass key. "Lock the door at night," Glenn said, his expression unusually serious. "This place gets, dark." I assumed he meant literal darkness. There wasn't a streetlight for miles. But something about the way he said it made me uneasy. I shrugged it off. City living makes you paranoid about harmless country folk. The first night was serene. I curled up on the couch with a book and let the sounds of the forest lull me to sleep. It wasn't until the second day that things started to feel off. The rules. Over breakfast, Donna mentioned the house rules again. Keep the doors locked, especially after sunset. And don't wander too far into the woods. They can be disorienting. I laughed. I'll try not to get lost. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It's not just about getting lost. There's things out there you wouldn't understand. Yeah, that. Glenn put a hand on her shoulder and she quickly changed the subject. I chalked it up to quirky small-town superstition. Later that day, I went for a hike. The woods were enchanting, with sunlight streaming through the trees and the sound of the creek bubbling nearby. I lost track of time and ended up farther from the cabin than I'd planned. When I finally turned around, the shadows were long and the air had grown cold. Man, as I made my way back, I heard something in the distance. A faint humming. It wasn't birds or insects. It sounded almost human. Curious, I veered off the path, following the sound. The deeper I went, the louder it became. It wasn't until I reached a clearing that I realized it wasn't humming. It was chanting. A group of figures in dark clothing stood in a circle, their voices rising and falling in unison. In the center was something, a large stone altar stained dark. I didn't stick around to see more. My instincts screamed at me to run. I sprinted back to the cabin, heart pounding. When I burst through the door, Donna and Glenn were waiting in the living room, their faces eerily calm. "Did you go off the path?" Donna asked, her tone icy. "No," I lied, trying to steady my breath. "Just went for a walk." She exchanged a glance with Glenn, but didn't press further. The locks. That night, I made sure the door was locked. But as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the image of that circle in the woods. My dreams were restless, filled with whispers and shadowy figures. At some point, I woke up to a soft scraping sound. It was coming from outside. And then I crept to the window and peeked through the curtains. At first, I saw nothing but darkness, then movement. A figure was standing at the edge of the trees, just barely visible in the moonlight. They were watching the cabin. I backed away from the window, heart racing. Maybe it was an animal, I told myself, a trick of the light. But I couldn't ignore the feeling of being watched. The scraping sound started again, this time at the back door. Summoning every ounce of courage, I grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the noise. When I flicked the light on, I saw deep scratches on the wood, as if something had been clawing at it. The rest of the night, I sat in the living room, clutching a kitchen knife and jumping at every sound. The escape attempt. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I was leaving. When I told Donna and Glenn, their cheerful facades cracked. "You can't leave," Glenn said, his tone firm. "Excuse me?" Donna's smile returned, but it was strained. "It's just not safe. You should finish your stay. We'd hate for anything to happen to you out there." And something about the way she said "out there" sent a shiver down my spine. "Thanks for the concern, but I really need to go," I insisted. Glenn's jaw tightened. "The car won't start." I stared at him. "How do you know that?" He didn't answer. Without another word, I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. But when I tried to open it, The key wouldn't turn. "What the hell?" I muttered, jiggling the lock. Donna appeared behind me, holding the brass key they'd given me. Looking for this, I felt a wave of nausea. "Give me the key!" "We can't let you leave," she said softly. I lunged for her, but Glenn grabbed me, his grip like iron. "It's for your own good," he growled. The basement. They locked me in the basement. It was cold and damp, with a single dim bulb casting eerie shadows. At first I screamed and pounded on the door, but no one responded. Then I noticed the smell, metallic like rust or blood. In the corner of the room was a wooden trapdoor. Something about it made my skin crawl, but I couldn't look away. Against my better judgment, I pried it open. The hole beneath was pitch black, but the stench grew stronger. I used the flashlight on my phone to peer inside and immediately regretted it. Bones. Piles of them. Human bones. I stumbled back, barely suppressing a scream. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl coming from the hole. I slammed the trapdoor shut and backed away, heart pounding. Hours passed, maybe days. Donna and Glenn occasionally brought me food, but they never spoke. Each time they opened the door, I considered rushing them, but Glenn's hulking frame made it impossible. The ritual. On the third night, or was it the fourth, they dragged me out of the basement. I kicked and screamed, but they overpowered me. Outside, the forest was alive with movement. Shadows darted between the trees, and the chanting I'd heard before filled the air. They brought me to the clearing with the altar. The circle of figures was waiting, their faces hidden beneath dark hoods. Donna and Glenn joined them, leaving me bound and helpless on the cold stone. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, my voice cracking. Donna leaned down, her eyes gleaming with something primal. "The woods demand sacrifice. It's the only way to keep them at bay." Before I could respond, the chanting grew louder. The air seemed to thicken, pressing down on me. The figures raised their hands, and the forest erupted in a cacophony of sounds. Growls, screams, and something that sounded like laughter. The ground beneath the altar began to tremble. From the shadows, something emerged. It was massive, its form shifting and impossible to comprehend. Eyes, teeth, and limbs appeared and disappeared, as if it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Its presence was overwhelming, and the chanting became a roar in my ears. The thing moved closer, its many eyes locking onto me. I could feel its hunger, its malice. It reached out with tendrils that seemed to stretch across dimensions, and I was frozen in place. Donna and Glenn were chanting now, their voices blending with the others as they raised their hands in reverence. "No! Please!" I screamed, thrashing against the bonds. The tendrils wrapped around me, cold and slimy, pulling me toward the entity. My mind was fracturing under the weight of its presence. Images flashed before my eyes. Other sacrifices, other victims, their faces twisted in agony. Just as the tendrils began to lift me from the altar, a deafening crack echoed through the clearing. The creature recoiled, its form flickering like a dying flame. The chanting faltered, and the air grew still. From the trees a figure emerged. It was an old man, his face lined with age, and his eyes burning with determination. He held a staff carved with intricate symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. The old man stepped into the clearing with an aura of authority that silenced the chaos. His staff pulsed with light, casting sharp shadows across the trembling altar and the terrified circle of cultists. The monstrous entity writhed, its tendrils retracting, its many eyes narrowing on the intruder. "You have overstepped," the old man said, his voice firm and resonant. "This land was not meant for you." The glowing symbols on his staff flared brighter as he drove it into the ground. The earth beneath the altar cracked and split, releasing a surge of energy that shot upward like a geyser of light. The entity howled, a sound that seemed to pierce through reality itself. As its shifting form began to unravel, the tendrils around me loosened, and I fell back onto the stone, gasping for air. The cultists stumbled, their chanting dissolving into cries of confusion and panic. Donna clutched Glenn, both of them staring in horror as the entity began to dissolve into the light. The old man advanced, His eyes locked on the creature. "Back to the void where you belong," he commanded, raising his staff high. With a final pulse of blinding brilliance, the entity was torn apart, its form scattering like smoke in the wind. The forest fell silent, save for the crackling of energy dissipating into the night. The old man turned to me, his expression grave but kind. He extended a hand, helping me off the altar. "You should leave this place," he said. "The woods may yet forgive you, but only if you never return." Behind us, the cultists were retreating, their unity broken. Donna and Glenn lingered, their faces pale and full of regret. "We were wrong," Donna whispered, her voice trembling. "We thought we could control it." "You cannot control the void," the old man replied sharply. "You should pray your ignorance does not invite its wrath again." With that, he led me away from the clearing. The air felt lighter with each step, as though the forest itself was breathing again. When we reached the edge of the woods, the old man paused, his gaze distant. "You are lucky to have survived," he said, his voice tinged with weariness. "Not many do." "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled faintly, the lines on his face softening. "Just a guardian of balance," he replied. "Now go and find peace." I stumbled back to the road, the forest at my back. When I turned for one last look, the old man was gone, and the woods stood still and silent, as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. I could still feel the faint tendrils of the entity's hunger lingering in my mind. Even now, I wonder if it truly returned to the void, or if it's waiting, biding its time, in the shadows of a world it was never meant to touch.